All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to change my view here for just a minute so you get both of us while we start, and then we'll switch. But I'd like to welcome Jeremy Madsen, a friend and author that I know, to the show today, and super grateful to have him on. We've been trying to connect a little bit for a while, but I keep putting him off. Um, and as you can tell, my voice is extra low today. I went on vacation for the holidays and got a great gift of getting sick, but most of the way over it. So hopefully there won't be any coughing fits in the show, but um, I make no promises. But on that note, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to let Jeremy introduce himself and we'll get going.
My name is Jeremy P. Madsen. I'm really grateful to be with Ted here today. I, growing up from about age 12, I knew I wanted to write fantasy novels. And I knew that I wanted to, in general, with my life, use my words to impact people for good, whether that was through writing or through speaking, teaching. And in college, I wrote some stories throughout high school, and then in college, I started working seriously on an epic fantasy novel, and that was a 7 year process, 5 years for the first draft, and then a year for the second draft, year for the third draft. During that time, I completed college and started working for an amazing organization called Latter-day Saints in Publishing, Media, and the Arts. That is how I met Ted. Learned a lot about publishing, learned a lot about the industry, and now I'm starting the process. I'm in the middle of the process of self-publishing my first epic fantasy novel. It's called The Pyromancer Scroll, and it's coming out in March of 2025.
And I'm excited to have Jeremy talk about this because he's dabbling in something that I've been interested in. I just haven't looked into it a whole lot, but serialized publishing. And so I loved what he's been doing, and we'll get into that. But I met Jeremy when, as you mentioned, when we both were working or volunteering with the LDS organization. He was one of the project managers, and I was on the board of directors. And one, I just have to toot Jeremy's horn here for a minute. He really is one of the most organized people I know, and it takes that kind of skill and organization to be able to pull off what he's doing. But at the same time, he has also been, I've sat and watched him make deliberate choices in that role and be very innovative in how he solved problems. And I think that's just such a key skill for any creative to be able to do that. But Jeremy, let's talk. Today I really wanted to just dive into that, how your creative journey and how you're being deliberate in your publishing choices, and then also how you're kind of being disruptive in your efforts to make the most of the creative time you have. But let's dive into just this journey to where you are now, and talk about, why did you choose to go the route that you're going. You mentioned that the book comes out in March, but there's already chapters that are out there. So talk to us about that.
Yes. So for very many years, I surveyed the publishing landscape and I reached the conclusion I want to traditionally publish. Some of my reasoning behind that was if I don't have a good enough book to be accepted by a traditional publisher, then why am I trying, what business do I have trying to self-publish it? And also looking at the extra support, the funding that traditional publishing companies provide, especially the distribution. Uh, if you want to get into physical bookstores, you pretty much have to be through a decent sized publisher, if not one of the big five. And I began that route. Fall of 2023, I pitched to several different publishers at the 2023 LDSPMA conference, and I was gearing up to start the big long process of sending out. I was fully prepared to send out 40 query letters, 50, 60 query letters to agents and publishers, fully prepared for that to take 6 to 12 months, fully prepared to get rejection after rejection and a lot of no responses from anyone. And as I was on the brink of diving into that world, which I knew can be very disheartening and very long and discouraging for a lot of first-time authors, I took a step back and I did some more reading, some more research, really about a whole week. I just dived into what are all the experts saying about publishing. And I already knew a lot about the industry, but doing that deep dive and really searching out and thinking, what are my goals and what do different paths look like? I came to a couple very intentional conclusions. The first one was no matter what path I'm going to do, building an author platform falls entirely on me. No publisher will, or really at this point can, do extensive marketing for me. And so I'm already facing the prospect of a 6 to 12 month journey of building an author platform. Do I really want to precede that with a 6 to 12 month journey of getting traditionally published, or do I just cut that out and just skip straight into that 6 to 12 month author platform building stage? And the other realization I had was if I self-publish, I have a lot more control about where readers are buying the book. I can sell the book more easily on my own website, control the price more easily, control the format more easily. And the more I can sell through my own website, the more I'm collecting readers' emails, the more I can build my email list, and the better position I'm in for future books. And the final piece of my decision was I have a lot more creative control over how the book is produced and how it's released if I self-publish. Because as I was thinking about how do I want to build my platform, I had several ideas that I was very excited about, but that I knew most publishers would just say no to. One of those ideas was to release at least the first half of the book, if not the entire book, on several different reader platforms. There's a major platform called Royal Road, which is very big on fantasy, certain niches of fantasy. RGB is a big one. There's another platform called Wattpad, where authors can release books for free. And I had seen a couple other authors release books for free, um, even as they were publishing other books as a way to build a readership on those platforms and reach new readers. So I was toying around with that idea, and I was toying also around with, well, as long as I'm going to release it on those platforms, I may as well release it on my website. And that was the start of this idea of serially publishing my book. And that has been ongoing. That started in September. I've been releasing one chapter a week. It's released on my website, which is hosted through Substack, another very intentional choice. It's pushed out to my email list through Substack. I record the audio myself, which was a money saving decision, which I knew it would be a lot of time. And I'm in the middle of it now, and I can affirm doing your own audiobook, it's a lot of time. Um, but I have more time than I have money right now, at least to pay several $1,000s for an audiobook. So I'm also releasing the audiobook as a podcast and on YouTube, and then I'm also releasing it on those platforms. And all of this is a big experiment, you could say an intentionally disruptive experiment to see does this model work for building readership base, building reader interest before the book actually hits the shelves. The other big disruptive piece to all of this was as soon as I decided I'm going to self-publish and I started looking into some of the costs for some of the things I wanted to do, I quickly realized this is really expensive. So I did a Kickstarter. And Kickstarters, I think, are becoming much more common in the book publishing industry. Brandon Sanderson was a huge pioneer, though there were people doing that long before him. I know Michael Sullivan was doing Kickstarters for fantasy books quite successfully before Brandon Sanderson did. But Sanderson really cracked that nut wide open. So a lot of authors are doing that now. And I have benefited from his disruption of the industry in that respect. I did a Kickstarter really just focused on reaching my circle of family and friends and existing connections. And it was a big success. I was able to raise about $7,000 in 2 weeks. And the other advantage of that Kickstarter, one, it gave me the funds to do the editing and software and all that for my book. And two, it was a big morale booster because instead of going through 6 months of work to get my book ready to publish and then putting it out there and hoping people would buy it, I got those pledges up front. I got 109 people already committing to buy my book, already paying for the book before I went into any of that very intense production process. And it also committed me. Now I have 109 people who have paid money and who are expecting the book to be released on March 10th, 2025. And so that's very helpful for working against procrastination is when you have to fulfill those promises.
That's great. And there's something you said that I love. You mentioned how you figured out what your goals were. You figure out kind of as an author, what's your purpose first. And then you're able to figure out, okay, now what specific choices do I need to make to help me get there? So now everything that you're doing always ties back to all that. And I'm sure there has been and there will be good choices that you're going to have to say no to just because you're like, yeah, that's a great idea, great thing I could try, but that doesn't line up with the direction I've got set for right now.
So I'll give a great example of how my goals inform my choices. So most self-published authors these days uh, use Amazon KDP or Ingram Spark print on demand for pretty much all of their actual book printing. People buy the book on Amazon, Amazon prints a copy of the book, ships it to them, and never touches the author's hand. This has been a great thing for authors because they don't have to pay up front for a huge bulk order. They don't have to warehouse 1,000 books in their basement. They don't have to ship the books themselves. Amazon or Ingram Spark, if they go through that, they just take care of that. And I will be using that to fulfill orders purchased through Amazon. But as I was looking at what are some of my other goals and some of my marketing um, plans, I knew a couple things. One, I knew I wanted to have in-person events be a big part of my marketing and sales. I've seen events work. I've seen other authors selling at events. I think it's a great way to meet new people and it's a great way to move a lot of books fairly quickly. I knew I wanted to speak at a lot of conferences and sell books at those conferences. I knew I wanted to present at high schools and colleges at like English classes or book club, writing clubs. And I knew I'd want to bring author copies for those. And as I was looking all of this, I did the pricing, and for a very thick epic fantasy book, you're looking at $6 to $7 per book to pay Amazon to print it and ship it to you through print on demand. And I thought, okay, well, if I want to go to an event, most other books are going to be, $16 to $18. If I can offer a book for $10 to $12, that's going to be very enticing to a reader who otherwise doesn't really know me, doesn't really have a reason to buy my book. And if I'm paying $6 to $7 for that really cuts into my profit per book. However, if I'm able to do a offset print run of 1,000 copies and bring that price per book down to $3 or $4, now that's going to pay itself off with higher margin on each of those books. Now, ordering 1,000 books is very risky. And I don't recommend it for most first-time authors because most first-time books don't sell 1,000 copies. Um, and especially an author who is not putting a ton of time into their career, their author career, maybe they have another job, they're doing this on the side. You don't want to be stuck with 1,000 copies of your book that are, or 968 copies of your book that you haven't sold yet. But with me and my goals, I knew this is something I am seriously diving into. This is going to be basically my part-time job for the foreseeable future until hopefully it becomes a full-time job. And I knew I was going to be releasing later books. And I knew with each of those later books that would create more interest and more sales for my current book. And I knew I wanted to do a lot of activities that would what's called seed copies into the world. So, for example, drive around, find all the little free libraries in my area, and just put a copy of my book in those libraries. So I knew I wanted all these activities that were going to require a lot of physical books that I personally distributed. And so it made sense. And because I did the Kickstarter, I had the cash up front to do a big offset print run. Whereas for most authors, that would be a very bad idea.
Well, this is great, and I love that you're sharing this because I think the the business principles and just the strategy and the innovation principles that you're talking about. apply not just to authors, they apply to any creative, especially ones who are trying to dive into this and trying to make it a full-time thing. Just so the level of commitment that you are demonstrating is really impressive, and I really applaud it. That's one of the reasons that I really do admire Jeremy is just the effort that he puts in. You know, he has his goals, and thanks for giving us just a little master class on what it means to be all in on your creative efforts. Um, One question I don't ask this a lot of times because I don't like to focus on the things that we're worried about or our fears. But when we do make these strategic choices, we chase after these dreams. There are things that worry us. What's one of your biggest concerns right now?
The concern that I think every author has, probably for every book they launch, probably even big names still have this fear, is you put a book out there into the world and people won't like it and people won't buy it. Not even that people won't like it, just that people won't give it a give it a glance, that they won't give it the time of day, and that your book will be sitting out there, and even if you get it on a bookstore shelf, that people will just walk right by and not be interested. And there's not really anything you can do besides just write a really compelling book, which is a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah,
Um, my other big fear is actually myself. I When I set these kinds of plans, like I did 2 days ago, I made a very detailed list of here's everything that needs to happen between now and September, 6 months following my book, all of the marketing that I want to do, everything that I need to do to publish. And it's all very well and good on paper, but then can I execute it? And there's been so many times in my life that I set these ambitious goals and make these clear-cut plans, and then I just don't execute them. I don't have the discipline or the habits in place to be able to pull it off. And, when I started writing my book is a great example. I said, I made a plan and I said, it's going to take me 1 year to write the first draft. Well, it took 5 years. And then I said, okay, it's going to take 6 months to revise that. Well, it took 2 years. So that's my biggest fear is myself.
that's a really vulnerable statement. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's a perfect thing to share because we're right at the beginning of the year. We're 3 days into 2025. As when we're recording this, it'll come out a little bit later, but this is a perfect topic for the January of a new year. Is as creatives, we all have these huge lists. Like I'm trying to go through mine and figure out what mine is. I'm in a different phase to where, as far as create, like I'm focusing on podcasting predominantly, but as far as creating other things, I'm more in a support role this year, trying to help some other people. My wife and one of my daughters reach their creative goals, and yeah, I'm okay with that. It's a very strategic choice for me because there are creative things that I'm interested in, but I'm like, it's the others are have a bigger priority right now. So thank you just for sharing that. Um, so let's switch gears a little bit. One of the things I do like to talk to people about is about doors that have opened for them to get them where they are. And well, let's start there. And I've seen some of the doors that have opened for you that have gotten you to where you are. One, LDS was a huge door for you because I mean, you were there for a long time.
4 years.
Yeah, you were there when you got, you were there when I started, and then you were still there when I left. And yeah, that 4 years. I know the conference would not have run as well as it did a lot of times without you. And I know there are a lot of people who run that conference, but there's a lot of things that would have happened without you. And then I know there's some other doors that open because of LDS but talk about how some of those doors that opened helped get you to where you are to be doing what you're doing right now.
The I am I'm a big believer in involving God in your journey. In fact, I believe it was Jenny Oakes Baker on the LDSPMA podcast who said, God should be your manager. God should be the
Yeah.
one telling you what to do. And I feel like God has opened those doors. LDSPME is a great example. I wasn't seeking that out. My editing supervisor, Aaron Wilder, asked me to apply. And there is another job working for another author group where I'm running a book marketing workshop where once again they basically reached out to me and said, "We're interested. We've heard about you and we want you to be our operations manager." There have been other times when doors that I was heading towards closed. There have been several times in the last 4 years. So in the last 4 years, I've always had, at any given point, I've had a conglomerate of about three different part-time jobs, LDSPMA and two others, one or two others, and it never really added up to 40 hours a week. And it meant a lot of financial instability and uncertainty. It meant not really meeting my financial goals because I wasn't working the equivalent of a full-time job. And there were several times when I was going down the road applying to full-time jobs and even interviewing for full-time jobs and jobs that seemed really, really good and that would really, really fit my interests. And they never panned out. And every single time, there's that initial disappointment or frustration. But I chose to say, okay, God wants me to stay where I am. And he wants me to keep learning with what I'm learning. And it meant I stayed with LDSPMA 4 years, learning a ton from that experience and from the classes and workshops that I was helping to put on. But it also meant that I had free time to work on my book. If I had gotten a full-time job, that would have cut significantly into that time. There were a couple periods of time where I I basically said, okay, I'm going to work 5 hours a day on these other jobs, and then I'm going to spend 3 hours editing or writing my book or revising my book. So that God closed certain doors so that it would funnel me through the doors he wanted me to go through.
Amen to that. I've seen that in my life, and it's there always whenever there's that phrase, when one door closes, another one opens. And I am a firm believer that God does open a lot of doors, and I do believe that there's doors that He closes purposely, sometimes just to teach us, and sometimes He needs us to wait and to learn in that moment, so we'll be ready for another opportunity that comes around. And so, thank you for sharing that. Um, what are some doors that are opening up for you right now?
As soon as I made the decision to self-publish, one of the reasons I knew that was the right decision is those doors started to line up.
Hmm.
So around that same time, I heard about this newfangled platform called Substack from I had never heard of it until like in 1 month I heard about it three or four different places and it would just start to pop up everywhere. And part of that was just Substack has been growing exponentially,
Yeah.
and there were a lot more people on it. But when I looked into it, it was right around that time I was trying to figure out how am I going to serially publish, and I realized, oh, this is a platform that um, has already built in all the subscriber features to maximize people's likelihood to subscribe, and it is a built-in newsletter platform, so it's a huge time saver. I don't have to build something on my website and then go over to MailChimp and build a separate email in MailChimp. It takes care of that for you. And it can even host a podcast. And so I don't need a podcast hosting service. It's all in one platform. That was definitely an open door that has
Mm.
simplified the process a lot. And then another door was that Kickstarter. I got this idea, I just kind of downloaded into my head of you need to do a Kickstarter and it needs to be this time frame and this is what you should focus on with the Kickstarter. And I met all of my goals with that.
That's awesome. Well, Jeremy, this has been just super insightful. And I said it earlier, it really has been a masterclass in how to just be deliberate in your creative choices and how to go for it and just keep going. And I really do wish you the best of luck. And listeners, his book comes out March 10th, 2025. But you don't have to wait until then. You can actually get on Substack, and if you search just Jeremy Madsen, everything comes up, and you can start reading his chapters right now. And then even after you do that, still go buy the book when it comes out. We want to support Jeremy and his creative efforts. But Jeremy, what I've done with other authors at the very end is just give you a chance to make a plug for your book, and then just again say thank you. But Jeremy, uh, tell us one more time just about your book that's coming out.
Before I do that, I have one more thought about being disruptive.
Okay.
We think of disruption as not following the rules, not doing what everyone else is doing. And that's all well and good, except we have to remember there's underlying laws behind success. And if we disrupt in a way that we're now following the laws being, are you providing value? Are you reaching the people who want that value? Are you offering it at a good price? You're going to do well. If you're disruptive in a way just to be different and you're not following those universal laws that govern business success and marketing success, you're going to get really frustrated really fast, even though you're doing things differently. Doing things differently isn't enough. You have to follow the laws. So, my book, it's called The Pyromancer Scroll. You can go to jeremypmatson.com and you'll see the banner to click and read it. And it comes out March 10th. It's about a pyromancer or fire mage who has jeopardized the eternal destiny of his soul through a very shady past. And he is trying to figure out, what do I need to do to redeem myself and not be dragged by demons to the void, but to be saved by angels when I die. And then there's lots of action and intrigue and adventure all mixed up with that.
Awesome. And one of the great things about Jeremy's book is it's clean fantasy. Uh,
Yes.
so you're going to be able to read it and enjoy it. You can read it with your kids. Your kids can read it, and that's one of the unique things about Jeremy's writing, is you're guaranteed always 100% to not have to worry about what you're going to come across. That's not in all books, but it is in some books that you have to worry about, and that that's out there for people to read what they want to read. But if you're truly interested in clean fantasy, Jeremy's one of the places to go. So
And
Jeremy,
that's a great example. That's another thing I've been very intentional about. A lot of people just write clean fantasy, but they don't really advertise it's clean. I am very open and very purposeful. I write clean fantasy, and I encourage everyone else to write and read clean books.
well, Jeremy, thank you so much for just being on the show today, and thank you for being patient with me while we rearranged our schedules a little bit to get you on. But I wish you
Yeah,
the best of luck.
this was really fun. Thank you,
Yeah,
Ted.
yeah, listeners, we'll see you in the next episode.